This is the Educational Triage Podcast. Welcome. We invite you to come along with us on an exploration of interviews, issues, and other exciting and relevant topics in education, especially alternative education. They say alternative education is a laboratory for mainstream education. Why? Well, join us every week and listen in as Philip Summers
Aloha.
and I, Tony Hunt, jump in feet first to discuss issues that may affect our classes, students, communities, as well as our teaching. Please subscribe if you enjoy and find relevance in what you experience here. And if you haven't left a quick review, please do. We appreciate your candor and insights so we can improve as we move forward. Now, let's see what's on board today. Hey ho, and I hope everybody is in a jolly mood while they're listening to this. This is Tony. Welcome back to Educational Triage, and I am joined with my colleague Philip Summers. Hey, Philip.
Aloha.
How are you today?
I am well, thank you.
Oh, good. Good.
That's what my granddaughter says now. I am well, thank you. They taught my 4-year-old to say that. My 4-year-old granddaughter. It's awesome. I am well, thank you.
It's proper, though.
Oh, she's very proper. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Does she have tea?
No, she's not having tea. She speaks very, very eloquently, however.
Well, bully for her.
Yeah, it's cute.
That's awesome. So this week we're talking about curriculum.
One of my favorite subjects, honestly.
And, well, it's actually something that I've done a lot, even prior to getting my degree. I did a lot of development and program development and stuff like that around curriculum. I knew that. I have some experience, but doesn't mean that I don't have more to learn, right?
Never enough to learn.
There's always something. And right now, I know that this is posting 2 weeks after the fact, but the Aurora Institute is going on. And I'm learning so much. And it's reinforcing a lot. And it's giving me a lot to really contemplate in the discussions that are going on there. So, and I heard that the national conference for the NAEA was fantastic. And people were just thrilled. So, anyway, so let's get into curriculum. And I guess one of the first questions I have is, how do you determine a curriculum for your population?
Well, there are certain commons. There's always that English.
Yep.
Always English.
Well, you already know your subjects because you're going to have math, social studies, social sciences, English. What else is there?
Oh gosh, geez. No.
PE.
Yep, we want to get PE in there. Let's see, some fine arts and stuff.
You have to write in health.
Yeah, health, science. We want some science. We want biology. We want some biology, and we would like some physical sciences for sure.
Maybe some geology.
Geology, perhaps. Yeah, things like that. Physics is always a tough one to pull off because it's kind of like advanced stuff. It comes with a sort of aura about it. There's somewhat of a way to get around that, though, if you get into it, like with maker labs and robotics and things such as that. And
you can do some components. You can do some components of physics, but let's not conflate physical science with physics.
True. That's what I was saying. Yeah, you're going to have to kind of play around. And like say with physics, because high schools are really good at offering that. The regular conventional high school arenas offer those sorts of courses.
Right.
And that's a good thing. Whereas I've always noticed that the alternative settings kind of fall short on those advanced mathematics, those advanced courses such as physics. But I would love to know of alternative programs out there or doing advanced science or advanced mathematics. I'm sure they're out there.
Oh, I'm sure they are,
Oh,
but I
absolutely.
think I think that the reason for that may be by and large that when you first have students entering into your hallowed halls of alternative
Mm,
ed, you're determining just how much remediation you need to go through in order to bring them up,
for sure. Yeah.
because students are generally not learning in the mainstream classroom, and they somebody dropped the ball maybe 5, 10 years ago, and or because of whatever circumstances that they weren't able to understand how to read
Yeah.
and to keep going. Maybe it had something to do with trauma. Maybe it has something to do with math. Maybe they never had the time or the place where they could actually develop those skills.
Absolutely. Or
Um,
they fell back in them, or they had an undiscovered sort of development issue and or a disability that
right.
all of a sudden we have to kind of catch up to. That's why I said English, English, and English, because I always found that regardless of the subject, if it had anything to do with reading or writing, it was sort of English, English, and I used it a lot. Social sciences, especially, it's kind of like, hey, we can use
Hmm.
that writing assignment, and I always kind of hit him on the
Yeah.
English side. It's a constant struggle, but it's a constant process as well for all of us, and
Right.
the kids used to it, so they all got better through
Well,
everything.
a
Yeah,
lot of it may have something to do with relevance.
yeah, yeah, relevance, absolutely.
And so I'm going to bring something up, which is something that I attempted when I first moved into the one room schoolhouse, which was working on project based learning. And that way, the students would have to figure out what skills they needed in order to solve a problem. But we didn't give them a problem at first. I was pretty, my skills were very nascent on that at that time. But as they grew, I realized, hold on, because if a student needs to use, what are some problems where students will need to use math? They'll have to figure out some history. They're going to have to do reading, of course, and they're going to have to be able to obtain some information and
Mhm.
glean that and plop that down.
Yeah, specific kind of reading too at the high school level.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And, or, there are some younger books or some
Hmm.
hill books, high interest, low level,
Yeah.
that they might be able to pull stuff out of, and that way they might be able to increase their reading, because if the interest is there, then they can pull that. I want you to think
Yeah.
about the movie October Sky, where the kids,
Yeah.
they weren't doing so well in math, and all of a sudden they were doing rocket science.
Yeah.
And it had all to do with relevance and the fact that they just loved doing it, and it was hands on. All of this was happening, and that was all their own doing, and it really paid off for them. So okay, so let's say that I tell you, come up with a renewable resource for energy that can be sustainable long term. So we know that let's say we know that wind power lasts for a while, but if there's no wind, then there's nothing there. So where do you get the bank? So how do you get something that might be more long term? Can you do something that maybe looks at how a leaf, let's say, can a leaf generate power with its chloroplast? Can you do something with that where, because of the sugars that are in there and that's all natural, would that be a sustainable way of creating some kind of power? And you could
Enter
do that in your
potato
house.
stage left. Yeah.
I mean,
At the
you
potato
know,
clock. Yeah.
could you do something that feeds on itself? So let's say that you're generating power through some kind of a chlorophyll, chloroplast kind of membrane or something like that. And what would that take, and how would that work if you started off by having lights in your house, and then that would generate that? And so it could be just regenerative by its own doing. Is that
Yeah.
making sense?
Oh, absolutely. I did that same thing. I had that unit I did climbing Everest, And
Mm-hmm.
so I had them step into the role of a climber. And so they kind of calculated how much oxygen they were going to get as they climbed up the mountain, and how that related to carrying oxygen through the blood system on the red blood cells, and how they were going to perform. And they were actually like calculating flow rates through the oxygen bottles,
Mm-hmm.
and how long they could travel on one oxygen bottle, and how much they would, or how, when they would start running into trouble on summit day.
Mm-hmm.
They were kind
Wow.
of going, "Oh, we're in trouble. I got like only 3 liters left." And it's
Oh,
like, "Yeah,
wow.
how long you got to go?" I got 6 hours. It's like, you're in trouble.
Did
And
you also did
they
you
knew
did,
that.
did you also incorporate food?
Yeah, their food, well, they didn't eat very much, and that was kind of incalculable because at that altitude, you just don't want to eat. So we were assuming you were eating, but you just weren't kind of eating. But they could actually measure the O2 level, the oxygen levels on the climb, and they were running into problems. Some of them were running so low on oxygen, they were getting nervous. They said that because they had to go away for the night, kind of thing. It was one of those things where they had to go away, and they came back to the school, and they said, "I was getting nervous. I thought I was going to die." They were getting like, it was real. And okay, you didn't die. They were said was, "I barely made it back to camp on my tank." And it's like, well, you made it, but some kids didn't. And I said, well, we'll
Oh,
assume
wow.
you were strong climbers and you just made that last hour without oxygen. But yeah, they knew it. They knew they were in trouble. It was funny.
Wow.
Yeah, because they'd climbed so long. There was weeks in the making. So they knew how much they could carry on that day,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them made decisions to carry an extra bottle, and they didn't have a problem.
But you could also, I mean, you could go with the food. What kind of clothing did they have to have?
Yeah.
And then and how are they going to pack all that? Now
Yeah.
I'm thinking about the John Krakauer,
Oh, yeah.
his
Oh,
book,
yeah.
where people are carrying up radio equipment and all this
We
other.
studied that. We talked about the absurdity of espresso machines at 26,000 feet, which is what happened on that. Yeah, as one
Well,
Sandy Hill Pittman. Right?
but if you think about it, those are sort of unrealistic expectations that
Yeah.
people have. They're not really ground in actual science or reality.
Mm-hmm. We
It's
talked
some
about that.
Yeah. So I think, but if the kids have to do these things and they have to figure these things out and write up a report on that, and they're in charge of it, it goes back to Peter Gray from Boston, who talks about kids leading their own sort of their own journey and doing and pacing it at their own level.
They did
And
extra stuff too because they had assumed the role of a climber. They did little side issues, and some of them really
right.
got into it,
Hmm.
and researched the other peaks, and wanted to do other expeditions virtually, things
Right.
like that. Just kind of a little exploration. So it's really quite cool.
So you could get into some of the physics with that, some of the
Hmm.
physical science, and you could also,
Yeah.
well, what's the caloric output though? Because
Oh,
if you're not ingesting enough calories, that's going to have a huge impact on you
right.
as well. And if
But
you
you're
have too
dying.
much,
Yeah.
then that's also going to impact how you're breathing and everything else.
Well, we're talking biologically at that altitude, you're literally dying. You're going to die after
Right.
about 36 to 48 hours. And
I
just your body consumes itself. So it's a weird thing. And it's
right.
fascinating too, because it's that, ooh, kind of mysterious science of is known as the death zone. So there is that spicy sort of, well, this is serious news, and
Hmm.
it is. And so it's a very intriguing sort of danger filled venture without, taking the kids into a danger filled venture.
But what does it also do to bone density?
I don't know. That's a good
Because
question.
and
Space
and the
travel
reason why
does things to it.
because that would be another thing that maybe I might come up with for the kids to
Hmm.
figure out. There are all these different
Yeah,
variables in there because they already know that going into space affects
yeah,
your bone density.
it does. Yeah. Going into space is another one I used to teach for science because that's a fascinating experience.
Hmm.
And humans have done that. And they don't know anything about that, really, hardly anything. It's what a world to open up to them.
Yeah, and and you could also like even the COVID,
Yeah.
the pandemic, they could look at viruses They could learn
Yeah.
so much about viruses and lab generated viruses. And now we have Boston. No, is it MIT
Mm,
or was it Boston College or Boston U who came up with this 80% mortality rate variation of the COVID virus?
I have not heard that. Oh dear.
So, yeah. So,
No.
yeah,
Kids like
came,
things that are like kind of, they like things that are dangerous, intriguing,
mhm,
that on the edge. And there are those things in the world. There are definitely those things in the world. And like I said, climbing Mount Everest, going to the bottom of the sea,
right.
climbing El Cap without ropes in 4 hours. There are those people that do that and do those things.
Yeah, but
It's kind of
not all of
exciting
them live.
world. Well, yeah,
It is.
you don't want to get the ones that do crazy stuff, but are doing control things like Felix Baumgartner, who kind of came out of 120,000 feet from space. I think he just leapt out of the balloon, and I think someone's topped
Yeah,
that too. And he was wearing a space suit and the whole
the Red
nine.
Bull. The Red
Yeah,
Bull.
the Red Bull, Felix Baumgartner and Red Bull, and
Yeah.
yeah, and that's a fascinating story. The whole thing, how he did that, and he
I
came
think
into
the guy did the guy in the weather balloon, did he survive?
yeah, yeah. Well,
Okay.
Felix did, and the guy on the ground, his the flight director was a guy who did it like in 1960, named Bill Kitteridge. So the guy that was
Okay.
pulling him down, the old guy, was the guy who did it like before him. And so
Mhm.
it's kind of a good story, but yeah. And the kids kind of get into that, and then they see him go into the spin and pull out of it, and they talk to him about what you're doing at spinning at like the speed of sound. Can you imagine 700 miles an hour going into a spin? Ouch! Because at that place in the atmosphere, there's no air to stop you, so you're spinning at the speed of sound,
See, these
700
are
miles an hour.
see, talking about these things and telling the kids,
Yeah,
maybe putting them on teams and having them figure out and formulating experiments
exactly.
to
Like, what would
recreate.
that do? What is that actually doing to a body?
Mhm.
What was that guy going through, and how did he stop it? Exactly. That would be fascinating to
So
really explore that. Yeah.
so if we find something that the kids are really interested in and maybe we can teach them about something, we can throw that at them. I remember when I taught I mentioned this in an earlier episode. When I first got there, one of the first things I did was I started teaching grammar, which
Ah.
to me is not that fascinating. But when I taught in South America, I had to teach seventh grade grammar. So what we
Mhm.
did down there, what we did was I think it was 9 different languages represented in my seventh grade class.
Mhm.
And so I would give them phrases. I would give the team leaders phrases, and the team leaders all spoke a different language. And then they
Mhm.
would have to teach that phrase to their members, to their teammates. And then they would write it out and they would look at it and then they would compare it to, let's say I said, I waved goodbye to my mother as I went to school.
Okay.
Then they would teach their teammates that in whether it was Korean, whether or not it was Japanese, maybe it was Portuguese,
Mhm.
could have been Hebrew, it may have been Russian, whatever it was. And then what they did was they had to break down the components
Okay.
as far as if you translate that exactly how you wrote the sentence out, what would it be? And they look and it's like, how do you know that you put these pieces of of the language where they're supposed to be?
Right.
And so it became a puzzle for them.
It became a puzzle of context and yeah, and culture really too.
Hmm.
Yeah, see, that makes sense to me. When I was taught grammar, it was just like, this is called that, and it looked like a bracket, and I didn't really understand the context because it was just English. There
Right.
was, and
Right.
there was no slang, there was no culture, there was no
Mhm.
context, and
And
that's
later on,
excellent. Yeah.
I did the same thing when I was teaching Latin,
Ah. Oh,
and
Latin. Yeah.
also when I taught French and Spanish.
Yeah.
So, but the
Yeah.
kids, for some reason or other, the kids really got off on Latin. They thought that was wonderful, and it was because for our audience, these kids were all in residential, so it gave them a language that they could speak and they could use behind the treatment team's backs. And so I was I had these people come over to me telling me that I needed to cease and desist teaching them Latin because none of the staff knew Latin and the kids were learning it too well and they were starting to communicate, which made my heart really leap for joy.
Right. Yes. That almost is awesome. It's like, yeah, I kind of like that. That
Because
happened in Hawaiian immersion language too. Yeah, that was
mhm,
awesome. The kids started speaking because it was a way to exercise the culture.
mhm,
It was a point of pride.
yeah,
Kids enjoyed speaking Hawaiian. Hawaiian kids were, yeah, it was something. But although they couldn't take Hawaiian language immersion into the sciences because the sciences were in Greek and Latin. It was, you can't translate
oh
Hawaiian
yeah.
into Greek and Latin because
Well,
Greek and Latin is translated in English. Yeah, yeah, it's funny that way.
well, actually, up in I'm going to say
Kind of.
it's around Colville, Washington.
Yeah,
I'm going to say that there's an Native American reservation up there, and the school district there. Um, the guy's a fascinating guy.
yeah.
They what they did was they got the elders of the tribe together, and they made that a bilingual immersion school,
Wow. Yeah.
grades pre-K through 12.
Hmm.
And so they were able to work with them, and they were able to get everything, all the subjects, all the subjects, including math. So they were able to do things, and so because this also helped the tribe because they were afraid that they were going to lose their language, and
Exactly.
and now and it doesn't matter who you are in the school, you will learn that language. So
Yeah.
they have white kids, they have brown kids, they have the native kids all learning that language and all doing that. So it actually does a lot of real good stuff because it makes the brain learning a second language does so much development for the brain for a child and even for an adult. And
Yeah.
so telling a kid that they can't speak their native language is not okay because they need that, but they
Yeah.
also should be able to begin learning English so that they can do that because that opens far more opportunities for them in order to get that done. So, but that is something else. So you can do things
Right.
depending on, what the culture is around you. And the other thing I did was I took that oh, what was it called? Something, it was grammar. It was a big yellow book. And you got all these sentences, and there were things that were wrong with the sentences. And
Mm.
so I gave them, maybe it's like a phrase a day or something. I can't remember. But I gave each team 10 sentences, and then they had to correct them. And then they had to teach them to everybody else. And people were
With
still,
with
and
corrections,
yeah,
why
I
it
had to
was,
show
what
them.
the correction was, and why it was corrected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And which was fascinating because people were calling each other out on things right and left.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I was really amazed, and the kids loved it because it was so much fun. It was so different.
It
But
is. They like doing it. They like playing with the words.
the one thing I did discover was I did do some project based learning, and I thought, okay, so 3 years down the line, I have a whole new group of kids, and I'm going to try to repeat this experiment. It did not work. It fell
Huh.
flat on its face. And the reason why is because you have to read the room.
Hmm.
You have to read the room. So maybe this worked with that group of kids, but what's going to work with this group? So so have
That's
them,
very true. Yeah.
and if they have some kind of investment in it where they get to help make the decision. So, okay, so let's learn about,
That's a
let's
great point because it got me thinking about that. I have drawers of stuff, and some of it's a big file, some of it's a littler file, but I have a lot of stuff. I don't have that file I pull out every April
mhm.
that goes for 4 weeks till May that I pull out every year. I never had that. I had things that came and went, and like you said, it is this year that thing didn't work, and so I tried something different, or the kids and I came up with something new, and I started a new folder. And then, like it just things evolved, and folders got bigger, and some folders just
Mhm.
stayed small. But yeah, it wasn't a go-to folder every year. Yeah,
So the big question too is how do you evaluate the student's work?
yeah, that's a good question.
And so that and this is kind of like one of those weird things, especially here in Oregon, which is assessment
Hmm.
and putting it into a rubric and
Oh,
doing all of that and
the R
going
word.
for instead of mastery, you can do proficient or
I
you
like
can do
proficiency
well.
better.
Proficient to me means you can do it. I would
Okay.
rather have a doc. I would rather have a doctor who's not proficient but is way beyond proficiency and is above that. So, I
Well, I mean, I'm looking for if I'm looking for C, I'm looking for
right,
proficiency. Yeah,
right, right, right,
yeah.
right,
Mastery
right,
is an A. Yeah. Okay.
right, and then nothing below that because that
Yes,
means that they're still
never below a
developing.
C.
You're still
Exactly.
developing. You're still
Yeah.
developing, and so how
And
do
let's make
you?
that clear too. At least in my grades, it's never below a C. A D is just not acceptable.
Well, no,
No, it just isn't,
no.
because it's just a way of kind of not giving me an effort. It's like, no, no, no. No, no, you can give me a C.
And that's why I don't think it's fair to have kids be in grades. I think that there needs to be a litany of the different proficiencies or competencies that they need to do for each
Mhm.
level, let's say. And as they go through them, sure, some kids may blow through a lot of those, but that also means that you should be able to give them something a little bit more challenging as you go.
Yes.
And maybe they're just not being challenged enough. So you have to, figure that part out. And that's where you talk to your team
Yeah.
and you start borrowing, you start doing workshops, you start reading, you start trying to get that imagination in your own head going, because that's the thing that's going to get them going, is that imagination. And if they don't feel challenged enough, and I also think a lot of the work needs to happen at school, because that way, and don't give them homework,
Yeah.
because in the early years, if you give them homework and the you have those parents who are going to want to do the work for the kids. You don't want the parents doing the work for the kids. You want the kids
Mm-mm.
doing the work.
I
Um,
want to work with them too. This isn't,
yeah.
yeah, I don't want that habit of pulling the wool over my eyes. I want to be working with you to see how we work together, how you do
Hmm.
things. I want to aid you in your learning process. Yeah,
Right.
we're not checking boxes. We're learning.
Right. So at there now, one thing that I ran into was I was told that if students were working on a project, that you could only grade them on one element. So let's say that they were doing some kind of a research project on, let's say they're doing something on China. Are you going to be giving them their English credit? Are you going to be giving them a world history credit? Are you going to be, you have to pick one. You can't cross contaminate, not cross pollinate.
Cross pollinate.
And I thought, hold on a second, because you need all those skills.
Yeah.
So why can't you have credits for all of those? And their worry was more seat time
Yeah.
than anything else.
Well, you know.
And I say, the heck with all that. Let's get the kids the credit for what they did. And that's why we used to do the open houses. So that did you do open houses with them?
No, I wasn't able to.
Okay. Um, the open house. Why? Out of
Not enough time.
curiosity. Oh, see, the reason why we did open houses, I had the kids. They, I kind of guided them, but they set those up and designed them themselves and figured out what was going to be there. I had final approval, but it all came from them. And so for our audience, an open house was where we would reach out to the community and to the other schools and have other people in our network who would come in, and the students would show off the work that they'd done. A group of students might show off the works from their peers, And so everybody got to see that. We got to do that 4 times a year. And it wasn't just those students and their work, but it was something that they were just jazzed about. They were
Right.
so excited to do that and to have people actually come in and celebrate with them. And we had punch and we had cake and cookies. And I even had people from the university come in, and they looked at me and they said, "Would you like us to write some grants so that you can have X, Y, and Z here?" And I said, "I would love that." And they did.
Wow.
So it's one of those things, because we're always looking for something that's going to help us and be beneficial to the students, because we don't necessarily have all that much money. So if we can partner with universities or colleges or other businesses who might have some ideas, let's do it. And so um, you also get some really good feedback from the community on the curriculum. And it's a great way for the students to talk about what it is that they know and how much they know. And it's a positive thing. It's not there for parents to say, no, you're wrong. It's a place for the kids to tell you what they know, and you can evaluate off of that.
Right.
So, but yeah. And so that actually helped a great deal. There were times that I thought, oh my gosh, this thing is just crashing. I just don't feel good about their open house. And then the superintendent would come up and say, this is the best one you've ever done. And it's like, really? And I think maybe my stress levels were just really high. But something, I think that one thing that we always have to look at, though, is how do we get the students interested in what it is that we're going to do? How do you get them to buy in?
Well, that's the process there. If it's something that we have to do, then you want to meet them. You want to make them kind of come to you too. You don't want to say we're going to have to do this. The only time I've ever said that we're going to have to do this is some sort of prescribed testing. And how I get
Yeah,
them to do that is saying, I will give you credit for it. I always gave kids credit for things that they were asked to do at school. I never asked a kid to do anything that I did not give them credit for. So that was the way I enticed them. So if they had to
hmm
go do testing, 5 points in English. And, I can make it up other places. But I always gave them points because it was English and give it your best shot, really. Give it your best shot. And I'll give
and
you
that,
points. And if you pass it, I'll give you more points. Especially if it's a state test, you pass it,
mhm.
definitely give you more points for sure. Yeah.
Well, I
Um,
also, yeah, no, that's great. And then
yeah.
the other things that we did was we had
Yeah.
the book groups
Yeah.
where the students picked their own books.
Absolutely.
And then they would sit around, and we had people who came in. We've had the superintendent, we've had
Mhm.
other teachers, we had directors, people from the community who came in, and the kids get to pick the books that they discuss.
As many choices as they can get, as much autonomy and as control as over
Right.
their environment as possible. Yeah.
And they have to have enough time to have read it.
When it
And
came
what,
to like a research paper, I had to clear the topic, but I was generally pretty generous. They couldn't do, for example, the legalization of marijuana back in the day before it was legalized, because it was always pro, and I was like,
right.
no, you can't do that. And there was
Why let them be pro?
I didn't want to because it was the same kind of thing, and abortion because it was always either you were against it or for it, and it was always kind of the same thing, and I didn't want to have that one going. I said, so let's, and I kind of steered them toward more not. I wanted them to research it and change their
Yeah.
mind, perhaps even temper it or strengthen it, but I didn't want them coming and going, I'm going to argue this point. And I'm going to stand on this hill on this paper. I didn't want you to do that. I wanted you to think a little bit through it. So I
Right.
gave them other subjects. And so in that regard, they had a lot of leeway that way. And when it came to history, I kind of let them pick and choose. I had them cover it, but if they really wanted to go more earlier than later, I
Mhm.
kind of let them do that. Generally, they wanted to go more modern, which was good.
Right.
Yeah, things like that.
No, I just remember this one student. We were having troubles with them, and this was in a high school completion class, and the student was fighting the whole time. But what they did was, instead of doing the actual work that they were supposed to be doing, they were taking copious notes and doing all this research, and they were starting to build binders. And so the instructor came up to me and he said, I'm losing my hair. And I said, yeah, I can tell you're getting a little thinner. And he said, yeah, he said, I don't know what to do with this kid. And I said, what's she doing? And he told me, and I said, hold on a second, what credits are we looking at? And so we looked at it, and I said, you know what? They've got the credit because they've been doing all the research. If they can compile that and if they can discuss it with you, they are done. Take a look at all the stuff that they've done. And now you have her write a research paper based on what she already knows. And within 3 days, the girl was done.
Yeah.
And he was saying, she's not going to graduate on time, but we got her through. She was a little upset because she really loved being at school, and just she was in her element with him. And
That's another one. Sometimes when they get close to graduating, they sabotage themselves because they
Mhm.
don't want to graduate.
Right. But I had another student who came up to
Yeah.
me and he said, I want to talk about society and Marxism. And I said, well, what do you want? And he said, well,
Or-
um, I really feel like I need to read the Communist Manifesto. I said, okay. And what are you countering that with? What are you comparing it to? And he said, I don't know. And I said, well, why don't we take a look at some of Plato's Republic? And you take Plato's Republic and you look at what are the bases of a society. And then maybe you can also take a look at the allegory of the cave and we can discuss those. And then you take Marx and you read through that. And when you're finished with that, you can kind of compare the two. And he came up to me and he said, what have I done? He said, you are just breaking my brain. And I said, well, I think you're intelligent enough to do it. And it took him a while and he stalled on some of it. But then all of a sudden he looked at me and he said, it's starting to make sense now. And he came up with an incredible paper.
He really did, huh?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of material to compare and contrast.
Well, basically, he was going to go with the bases. Like every society should have, you need food, clothing, and shelter.
Yeah.
Those are the three basic needs. And then how does Marxism take care of that for everybody? And does it work well for everybody? And he looked at me and he said, well, that's a hard one. And I said, well, you might also take a look at democracy and see how that works, or capitalism. And he said, oh, okay. And so he never got around to the capitalism, but it was a good one. And he came back about 4 years later and said, oh, I love that project.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see why you would. If only more people would undertake that project, not just watch something on TV and go, now I know.
Right.
Because
Right.
those words are being bandied about in the wrong definitions. So
Well,
yeah.
I think where we're running into problems with reading and writing is everything has come down to a text or a tweet,
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I think that just a
and we
very
don't read it.
surface knowledge is being passed off as somewhat of being an expert, a little bit of expertise, and it's not. I mean, it does take time to develop an expertise in something,
It
and it
does.
does take a little bit of humility to go, I don't know.
Well, but how many homes have parents who are reading? Not their phone, but actual books.
One, two. Well, I got.
I don't I don't think we have a lot of parents who do that anymore. Everybody is addicted to their phone.
Um, I must raise a freak family, I guess. Of
Oh
the
well,
four kids that I got, and three of them have kids. Three of them, uh, yeah, almost both spouses read
mhm.
books. or something, and they encourage reading books to their kids. So all five of my granddaughters read like crazy people, books and or pads. So
Well, I think
weird, but yeah,
it's becoming more niche.
yeah.
And the kids that do actually read books
Mm.
on a regular basis, those are the kids who tend not to be quite so anxious
True, I think. Yeah, I'm not an
because,
expert
well,
on that one.
they're not so glued to their phones. I mean, if you
Yeah,
read Gene Twenge and
yeah.
the book iGen, I
Yeah.
mean, and you see all these other things. I can't remember the names of the videos that were on Netflix and on YouTube, but about social media. It's pretty amazing what they do and what they do to your endocrine levels and
Yeah.
everything else in the dopamine. But that would actually be a really good project for kids to look at. What is the impact of social media on you and your peers?
Realistically,
Yeah,
I mean,
what is it, a good impact or is it a negative impact, and how do you make it into a positive, or does it need to be sort of roped in to, I don't know, maybe you only get like a half an hour a day.
well, there has to be some kind of awareness there.
Yeah,
Just of what
definitely.
is social media anyway? I don't know. It's the whole thing's kind of weird anyway. I'm not entirely sure that like older people are having a harder time than younger people because they kind of really like it. They're sort of like, yeah, you see them
Well,
interviewed and they're like, hey, I really like this. And you see younger people going, yeah, I like this, but I like that one kind of too. And it's like, I kind of see them going all over. Like older folks are going, but I really like this media. And I'm like, oh my goodness. They really
well,
like a certain type of, like a certain brand of TV or a certain like Twitter or like Truth Social or something like that. Like there's a real devotion to a certain brand of media that I don't think young people have. I
well,
think
I
it's
think
going to
it,
float
I think
anywhere.
it fills a void.
It does fill a void. Oh wow.
Kids aren't
Yeah.
out playing in the streets like they used to. I remember when we moved into this one house, everybody
Mm.
came out and they were all like, "Can you come out and play?" Da da da. And we used to play all the time. We were never indoors until dinner time,
Yeah, yeah.
unless it was pouring rain or snow or something like that. But we were always out there playing. And when we moved to this one town, the first night we were there, the kids all came out and they said, "Come out and play." And so we did because we had the biggest yard.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you were
And
that kid. Okay, yeah.
yeah, well,
Big yard. Biggest yard. Yay.
it was a huge yard.
Yeah, you were that kid.
And then they used to bring over their snowmobiles to ride around in it. And then
It's a big yard.
it was a big, well,
Yeah, it's like an
we
acre. What
had,
was that?
it was about, I'm going to say, I think maybe it was about an acre. And we had another
Okay.
garage. We had another garage at the other end of it. And
Nice.
the funny thing is that I told my parents, I said, why don't you just sell that? I was like seventh grade by the time we moved. But I said, why don't you sell that part? Can you sell that part separately from this part and make more money? And they said, no, no, no. Well, guess what happened as soon as I
Oh
said
yeah.
it? The people did
Sublet three
exact.
times.
The
Yeah.
people did that.
Yeah.
So, but no, we just spent so much time outside or just involved with people that, because we walked home from school. Sure, we lived in a small town, but I also walked about a mile and a half, 2-3 miles home, or rode my bicycle, and in other towns. So and they don't have as many kidnappings as they used to. In fact, students are safer walking home from school today than they were back when you and I were kids.
What's happening?
You would never know it. You would never know it
Where
because
do ADD kids go these days? I mean, they can't sit still long enough to game.
well,
Where are they
well,
going? A
they need more
support group?
recess. They need far more recess.
No
They need a
kidding.
lot more. They need time to actually work that stuff out because that's part of their processing.
Tell me
So
about it. I was that kid. I couldn't sit still. I'd be going, "Come on, you guys, go outside. I don't want to play a game. Let's go."
so think about this. If you have ADHD kids,
Hmm.
what kinds of stuff can you do that would allow for them to be more kinesthetic
I'm a bike,
with
basketball hoop,
whatever it is that
sports.
they're learning?
There are sports actually, tons of sports.
Yeah,
Kids
but you
are
might,
actually doing that sort of that specializing thing, which isn't so great, but
but not every kid wants to be in sports.
that's
You know what I
true.
mean? And they may be hyperactive. I think that the phones and the computers and all this other stuff tends to do that because it has this funky effect on the brain.
You might. I'm not
But
sure.
how do you get kids to be more interactive? How do you get them to do things? And maybe they can come up with some ideas.
I do
Kids are
think that if kids are more active, then they're more involved. They're more involved. They're more involved with each other. I think if kids are more like zapped into their TV screens or their computer screens, they're not going to be involved with anybody much else besides what they're interacting with in the
Yeah.
screen itself. I've seen that so much. Even when they're sitting next to each other, it's kind of like the screen.
Yeah, maybe that's something else that we need to investigate.
Yeah, I don't know. I
What if,
don't. Screens kind of get the focus, and then they become like the two-dimensional flat world of attention, and then no one really interacts with the three-dimensional world of out here.
right, right. I think what I would do is I would redirect them from the screens and not let them use computers, have them
Yeah.
use as many books, except everything has become so digitized.
Yeah, I mean, if you need to use it, like use it for a video for research or something, but make it as tactile as possible.
Oh yeah.
Bring it out here to the world, or take yourself someplace out of the classroom. That's the best thing too. Just get out of those classrooms and go
Hmm.
do something.
Yeah, and get rid of the phones. Get the phones
Yes.
out of their hands.
Oh yeah. Especially if you go out
And
in public. I
yeah,
would.
because when we talked about interviews and whether or not they were appropriate for the program or whatever, and maybe you can identify them for some other program.
Yeah.
You might even make telephones. You might make their cell phones something that go away and that they only have so much time during the day that they can actually access it. If the parents need to call, the parents
Yeah.
can call the office or they can, something else. I did have one parent who the kid would sit there and text his mom that I was being mean to him because I would tell him that he needed to get to work. And he said, I don't have my books. And I said, well, where are they? At home. And so I would give him his books and then he wouldn't want to do it. And all of a sudden his mother would be standing in my doorway. And it's like, what are you doing here? She said, why are you being mean to my child? It's like,
What?
I'm not. I want your kid to get the work done. My son left his stuff at home. Well, could you go get it? I don't have time for that. Well, how did you have time to come here? I thought you were working.
Holy cow.
It was really screwed up. So
That is really screwed up.
I don't want to go any further than that.
What are you doing
Um,
here? Leave now,
she would be
please.
there on a moment's notice. I have no idea how she got any work done. But
Ooh. Talk about helicopter parent.
yeah.
She was just like right outside the door.
Oh, it was amazing.
Oh
My
wow.
son can do no wrong. I'm thinking, okay. And then you have just the opposite where the parents are like, oh, please just keep them in school all day. Give me some rest.
Do they have to come home tonight? Yes. Gosh, be
My
nice.
child won't go to
Yes.
school. I had to call the cops to get them to take her to school. It's
Yes, I've had those parents too. It's like your son and our daughter are wonderful people. What is wrong with you? It's like, gosh. Yeah, it's something. It's yeah,
but
weird.
anyway, but I think that if they have an investment in everything, and curriculum is a really hard one to figure out.
Hmm.
But you can't just have a one size fits all. And so you're going to have something that is personalized. You're going to have an individualized learning plan for each student to figure out what it is that they're going to want to do.
Yeah, I think so too.
Um, and maybe you can do that in the projects and maybe have them come up with something and maybe you can partner them up with somebody else. You might want to do some class wide stuff where the kids do have to interact and you have some projects like the Everest project would be a great one.
Yeah, that really worked for everybody.
And
They all took a role.
yeah, and you guys communicated with the people on Everest too, right?
Yeah, we followed them and sent them emails, and they sent back dispatches, and it was cool when they could. They were personalized, but most of the time they were generalized.
Yeah.
Hey world, we're here. But sometimes they're, hey, you guys, we're thinking of you, which was really cool when they did
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I think that will conclude this week's episode.
Works for me.
Okay, and then next week we're going to take a look at funding.
Oh, everybody's looking for funding.
Yeah, everybody's looking for funding. And we're going to take a look at a couple of other things. So until that time, please subscribe, leave us some feedback, give us a review. If you've been here for a while, come on, give it to us. Let us know what your thoughts are, and we will see you again next week. Until then, adios.
Aloha.